Ambassador Ji-won Park sat quietly in her chair at the massive Galactic Council table. Around her, representatives from hundreds of different alien species filled the enormous chamber. The room buzzed with nervous energy as translators worked overtime to convert dozens of different languages into something everyone could understand. Ji-won adjusted her simple black reading glasses and turned another page in her grain shipment report. The numbers looked good this quarter. New Seoul Colony had exceeded their soybean production targets by 12%. She made a small note on her data pad with her stylus, completely ignoring the growing panic around her. At the center of the chamber stood the Zephyrian War Commander, a massive creature that towered over everyone else. His species looked like a cross between a gorilla and a rhinoceros, covered in thick gray armor that seemed to be part of their natural skin. 4 powerful arms ended in clawed hands, and his eyes glowed with an angry red light. When he spoke, his voice was so deep it made the floor vibrate. "Citizens of the galaxy," the War Commander announced, his words translated instantly into hundreds of languages. "The great Zephyrian Empire has been patient long enough. For too many years, we have watched lesser species squabble over resources that rightfully belong to us." The Thrak representative, an insect-like creature with 6 legs and compound eyes, began clicking his mandibles together rapidly. This was their species' way of showing extreme stress. His translator converted the clicks into words. Surely there must be some diplomatic solution to this crisis. The Vorthan delegate's reaction was even more dramatic. The Vorthans were gaseous beings who lived inside special containment suits that kept their bodies from dispersing. When upset, their gas changed colors. Right now, the delegate's suit was flashing between angry red and fearful yellow so quickly it looked like a broken traffic light. Even the mysterious ethereal collective, beings of pure energy who rarely showed any emotion, had begun their traditional panic meditation. 3 of them floated in a triangle formation, humming in perfect harmony while their translucent bodies flickered with worry. Ji-won flipped to the next page of her report and noticed that rice production on New Busan Colony was down by 3%. She frowned slightly and made another note. They might need to adjust the irrigation systems or perhaps introduce new fertilizer methods. The 3 outer rim systems of Kepler 442, Wolf 359, and Proxima Centauri contain resources vital to galactic peace, the War Commander continued, his 4 arms gesturing dramatically. These systems must be surrendered to Zephyrian control within exactly 72 Earth hours. A collective gasp went through the chamber. Those 3 systems contain some of the most important trade routes in the galaxy. Losing them would cripple interstellar commerce for dozens of species. The representative from the Aquatic Federation, a fish-like being in a mobile water tank, began swimming in frantic circles. The crystalline hegemony's delegate, who looked like a walking diamond, started vibrating at a frequency that made everyone's teeth ache. Even the normally calm tree people of the Verdant Alliance rustled their leaves in distress. "And if we refuse?" asked the senior delegate from the Andromedan Republic, a humanoid species with blue skin and 3 eyes. The War Commander's laugh was like the sound of boulders grinding together. "Then the full might of the Zephyrian Empire will be unleashed upon this galaxy. Our fleet of 3,000 warships will reduce your homeworlds to cosmic dust. Your species will become footnotes in the history of our great empire." The panic in the room reached fever pitch. Delegates began shouting in their native languages, creating a cacophony of sounds that the translation system struggled to keep up with. Some representatives stood up from their seats, gesturing wildly. Others huddled together in small groups, whispering urgent plans. Through all of this chaos, Ji-won continued reading her agricultural reports. She had moved on to the livestock section and was pleased to see that the beef cattle on New Jeju Colony were producing excellent results. The grass-fed program was working better than expected. Human representative. The War Commander's voice boomed across the chamber, cutting through all other noise. His glowing red eyes focused directly on Ji-won's table. "The Zephyrian Empire demands your species' immediate response to our generous terms." Every eye in the chamber turned toward Ji-won. Hundreds of alien beings waited breathlessly for humanity's answer to what amounted to a declaration of war against the entire galaxy. Ji-won looked up from her datapad for the first time since the War Commander had begun speaking. She blinked once as if trying to remember what the question was about. Her expression remained completely calm and slightly bored, like someone who had been interrupted while doing important paperwork. "We'll get back to you on that," she said in the same tone she might use to acknowledge a request for office supplies. Then she immediately returned her attention to her datapad, completely dismissing the towering War Commander and his threats of galactic annihilation. She had noticed an interesting trend in the dairy production numbers that deserved further investigation. The chamber fell into shocked silence. Even the war commander seemed stunned by the casual dismissal. His forearms dropped to his sides as if he couldn't quite process what had just happened. Ji-won glanced at the small clock on her datapad. Her lunch meeting with Trade Minister Hyun-woo was in 20 minutes. She had heard that the station cafeteria had finally managed to get their kimchi recipe right, and she was looking forward to trying it. War Commander HFY stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crushing Fist, and stared at the blue-green planet called Earth through the massive viewing screen. Behind him stretched the most fearsome armada the galaxy had ever seen. 300 enormous warships floated in perfect formation, each one capable of destroying entire cities with a single shot. The Zephyrian dreadnoughts were like floating mountains of metal and death. Each ship was over 2 kilometers long, bristling with enough weapons to level continents. The support vessels carried thousands of battle-ready warriors, all eager to prove their worth in combat. This was the same fleet that had conquered 47 star systems without losing a single major battle. HFY had expected the humans to react like every other species the Zephyrians had encountered. First would come the desperate emergency broadcasts, begging for mercy. Then frantic attempts at negotiation, offering everything they owned in exchange for their lives. Finally, complete surrender when they realized the hopelessness of their situation. Instead, his communication officer handed him a message that made his 4 eyes blink in confusion. "Sir, we have received a transmission from the human diplomatic station," the officer reported, his voice uncertain. HFY grabbed the message tablet with one of his massive clawed hands. The message was typed in simple, polite language that seemed more suited for a business meeting than a military confrontation. To the visiting Zephyrian fleet, the message began. "Welcome to the Terran system. Please move your vessels to the designated coordinates attached to this message. Your current position interferes with our regular shipping lanes, and we have several cargo transports scheduled to pass through that area today. Thank you for your cooperation. Signed, Ambassador Ji-won Park, Human Diplomatic Corps." At the bottom of the message was a detailed map showing suggested parking spots for alien vessels, complete with instructions about how to request refueling services and waste disposal. HFY read the message 3 times, certain he was missing something. Where were the panicked pleas? Where were the offers of surrender? The humans were treating his invasion fleet like tourists who had parked in the wrong spot. "Sir?" his communication officer asked nervously. "How should we respond?" HFY crushed the tablet in his massive hand. "Ignore them," he growled. "They will understand our power soon enough." Meanwhile, on Terra Station, Captain Minho walked into the military tactical center carrying a cup of coffee and a small plate of cookies his wife had packed for him that morning. The tactical center looked like any other office building, with dozens of people sitting at desks and working on computers. Nothing about it suggested they were preparing for the largest space battle in human history. "Good morning, everyone," Minho said cheerfully, settling into his chair at the central command desk. "I hope you all had a pleasant weekend. Before we begin today's work, I want to remind you that spring cleaning starts today." The other officers nodded and began typing on their computers. To any outside observer, it would have looked like a routine morning meeting at any ordinary company. No one seemed particularly worried about the massive alien armada waiting outside their solar system. Spring cleaning was the military's code name for their quarterly readiness exercises. Every 3 months, they tested all of their equipment, moved ships around, and practiced various defensive scenarios. It had been going on for so long that most people barely noticed it anymore. Within minutes of Minho's announcement, ships that had been sitting quietly in Earth's orbital shipyards suddenly came to life. Their engines began glowing as power systems activated. Vessels that had been listed as under repair, or scheduled for maintenance, started moving toward the outer edges of the solar system. In the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, mining operations that had been running for decades began changing their patterns. The huge machines that normally dug valuable metals out of space rocks started working in different areas. Their massive drilling equipment moved to new positions that just happened to provide excellent defensive coverage of the main approach routes to Earth. Back on Terra Station, Ambassador Ji-won spent her morning exactly as she had planned weeks ago. She sat in a comfortable conference room with representatives from the Centauri colonies, discussing a cultural exchange program that would allow human students to study alien art and music. "I think sending 50 students each way would be a good start," Ji-won said, making notes on her tablet. "We can evaluate the program after the first year and expand it if everything goes well." The Centauri delegate, a tall, thin being with silver skin and large black eyes, nodded enthusiastically. Our young people are very excited about learning human cooking techniques. They have heard wonderful things about your pizza and hamburgers. After the cultural meeting, G1 attended a technical conference about water purification systems for frontier settlements. The discussion was quite detailed, covering different types of filters and the best methods for removing harmful chemicals from alien soil. She took careful notes and asked several thoughtful questions about costs and maintenance requirements. Around lunchtime, the Vorthan delegate from the Galactic Council arrived at her office in a state of obvious panic. His containment suit was flashing between bright yellow and deep orange, colors that indicated extreme emotional distress among his species. Ambassador G1, the Vorthan said through his mechanical translator, how can you remain so calm? The Zephyrian fleet will destroy everything. Your entire species faces extinction. G1 looked up from the stack of applications she was reviewing for new diplomatic positions. Each application required careful consideration, as the people chosen would represent humanity to dozens of different alien cultures. We've been through worse situations, she said calmly, signing her approval on an application from a young woman who spoke 6 alien languages. Ice ages that lasted thousands of years, plague outbreaks that killed millions, that really terrible period when a volcanic eruption destroyed all the coffee crops worldwide. You learn to adapt and keep working. News reporters from across the galaxy had gathered at Terra Station, their cameras and recording equipment pointed toward the main conference room. Representatives from hundreds of different species waited anxiously for what they assumed would be humanity's final surrender speech. The countdown timer showed less than 6 hours remaining before the Zephyrian deadline expired. Ambassador G1 entered the room at exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, just as her calendar had indicated for the past 3 weeks. She carried a small stack of papers and her usual cup of tea. Her assistant followed behind her with a projection screen that displayed colorful charts and graphs about trade statistics. Good afternoon, everyone, G1 said pleasantly, adjusting the microphone. Thank you for attending today's scheduled press conference about our new commercial partnerships in the outer sectors. The reporters exchanged confused glances. A crystalline journalist's body flashed nervous purple colors while an insectoid correspondent clicked his mandibles impatiently. This was supposed to be about the impending war, not trade agreements. G1 clicked a small remote control, and the first slide appeared on the screen behind her. It showed shipping routes between human colonies and several alien trading posts, with neat arrows indicating the flow of goods and services. I'm pleased to announce that we've successfully negotiated expanded trade relationships with the Vegan Mining Consortium, she continued, pointing to various locations on the star map. They will be purchasing increased quantities of our agricultural products, while we'll be importing their excellent titanium alloys. A reporter from the Galactic News Network finally raised his hand. Ambassador, what about the Zephyrian ultimatum? Your species faces complete destruction in less than 6 hours. G1 paused and consulted her handwritten notes, flipping through several pages as if trying to remember something minor she had forgotten to mention. Oh yes, about that Zephyrian situation, she said, finding the relevant page. We've carefully reviewed their proposal and have decided to politely decline their terms. Perhaps they could find a more constructive hobby, like building infrastructure or developing new technologies that benefit everyone. She turned back to her presentation slides without waiting for follow-up questions. Now, regarding the new shipping routes to the Vega sector, she continued, we expect to see a 15% increase in cargo volume over the next fiscal quarter. The reporters sat in stunned silence. Around the galaxy, billions of beings watched the live broadcast in disbelief. The humans had just casually dismissed the most powerful military force in known space and immediately returned to discussing business as usual. Meanwhile, in space around Earth, War Commander Thexvar had grown tired of waiting for humanity's surrender. His patience had run out completely after watching that absurd press conference. He stood on the bridge of his flagship and raised all 4 of his massive arms. All ships, assume attack formation, he commanded. We will show these arrogant humans the true meaning of Zephyrian power. The 300 warships began moving into their traditional battle pattern, a formation that had proven unbeatable in dozens of previous conquests. The massive dreadnoughts spread out in a wide arc, their weapon systems charging up with energy that made space around them glow with deadly light. Thexvar expected to see human ships fleeing in terror or making desperate last stands with their primitive weapons. Instead, he discovered something that made his blood run cold. The merchant vessels that had appeared to scatter in fear suddenly stopped running. Cargo panels along their sides opened up to reveal rows of missile launchers that definitely had not been there in any intelligence reports. Transport ships that looked like harmless civilian craft deployed weapon systems that seemed far too advanced for their supposed technology level. In the asteroid belt, mining platforms that had been peacefully extracting metals for decades revealed themselves as heavily armed defensive stations. Massive drilling equipment rotated to point toward the Zephyrian fleet, and what HFY had assumed were ore processing facilities lit up with the unmistakable energy signatures of military-grade shield generators. Even the colonial settlements on Mars and the outer moons, places that intelligence reports had marked as defenseless civilian populations, suddenly activated defensive arrays that appeared out of nowhere. Entire cities were surrounded by energy barriers, and weapon emplacements rose from underground bunkers. Captain Minho stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Soul's Pride, watching the Zephyrian fleet arrange itself for attack. His ship looked like an ordinary patrol vessel from the outside, but like everything else in the human fleet, appearances could be deceiving. All units, move to defensive positions, Minho ordered in the same calm voice he used for routine training exercises. Standard formation, please. Nothing fancy needed here. His crew responded with quiet efficiency. No one seemed particularly excited or worried about facing the largest invasion force in galactic history. The weapons officer checked his systems with the same care he used during regular maintenance. The communications specialist continued monitoring normal radio chatter from cargo ships and civilian stations. "Sir," the navigation officer reported, "all defensive units are in position and ready." "Excellent," Minho replied. He glanced at his watch and noticed it was almost dinner time. "Someone please remind the kitchen staff that the evening meal is still scheduled for 1800 hours as usual. No need to change our routine." War Commander HFY stared at his tactical displays in growing confusion and anger. His supposedly easy conquest had turned into something completely different. The humans had not just prepared for war, they had been quietly ready for this exact scenario for what appeared to be many years. Every aspect of human space activity that had seemed innocent and civilian was revealing itself as part of a carefully designed defensive network. The species that acted like galactic warfare was a minor scheduling inconvenience had somehow built one of the most sophisticated military systems he had ever encountered. War Commander HFY sat in his command chair staring at reports that made no sense. 3 months had passed since what should have been the easiest conquest in Zephyrian history. Instead of celebrating victory over a primitive species, he was reading casualty reports that grew longer every day. His fleet had been reduced from 300 ships to barely 200 functional vessels. The humans had not destroyed his ships through superior firepower or advanced technology. Instead, they fought in ways that violated every principle of civilized warfare his species had ever learned. Yesterday, a group of human merchant ships had approached his patrol squadron flying white flags of surrender. When his vessels moved to accept the capitulation, the merchant ships had suddenly opened fire with weapons that appeared out of nowhere. Before his commanders could react, 3 Zephyrian destroyers were floating wreckage in space. The day before that, his mining survey team had reported discovering valuable minerals in an asteroid field. When the mining ships arrived to begin extraction, they found that the entire asteroid field was actually a collection of hidden human weapons platforms. The asteroids themselves had been hollowed out and filled with missile launchers and defensive systems. "Sir," his communication officer reported nervously, "Admiral Kexthal is requesting immediate reinforcements for his sector. He says the humans are using garbage ships as attack vessels." HFY closed his eyes and tried not to think about how he would explain this to the high command back home. Garbage ships. The humans were literally using their trash collection vessels as military weapons, filling them with explosives and ramming them into Zephyrian battleships. "Send Admiral Kexthal whatever ships we can spare," he said wearily, "and request another emergency reinforcement fleet from the home system." This would be the 3rd time he had asked for additional ships. The High Command was already asking uncomfortable questions about why a simple conquest was taking so long and costing so many resources. Meanwhile, on Terra Station, Ambassador G1 was hosting her monthly dinner party for visiting diplomatic representatives. The station's main dining hall had been decorated with flowers from Earth colonies, and the kitchen staff had prepared a special menu featuring dishes from several different human cultures. Through the large viewing windows that surrounded the dining room, the guests could see flashes of light in the distance where space battles were taking place. Laser beams and missile explosions created a spectacular light show against the backdrop of stars. "The fireworks are particularly beautiful tonight," commented the delegate from the Aquatic Federation, a fish-like being whose translation device converted his underwater speech into audible words. G1 nodded pleasantly while serving herself another portion of bulgogi from the buffet table. Yes, our defensive operations have been quite active recently. The engineering teams are doing excellent work. The crystalline hegemony representative, whose diamond-like body sparkled in the dining room lights, vibrated with curiosity. How can you remain so calm while your species is engaged in such a massive military conflict? Ji-won paused to consider the question while cutting her meat. In the background, another series of explosions lit up space with brief, brilliant flashes. The defensive operations are proceeding within acceptable parameters, she said after swallowing her bite of food. Our military planners have been preparing for this type of situation for many years. Everything is going according to plan. She gestured toward the wine selection on the side table. Have you tried the red wine from New Busan Colony? It's quite exceptional this year. The volcanic soil gives it a very distinctive flavor. The conversation moved to safer topics like agriculture and cultural exchange programs, while the war continued to rage just outside their windows. The turning point came 2 weeks later when Admiral Soo-jin decided it was time to stop playing defense. She had been waiting patiently for the Zephyrian forces to spread themselves thin across the human colonies, and now they were perfectly positioned for her counterattack. Soo-jin's fleet appeared out of nowhere, emerging from locations where the Zephyrian sensors had detected nothing but empty space and cosmic debris. Some of her ships had been disguised as floating wreckage from previous battles, their life support systems running on minimum power to avoid detection. Others had been hiding inside gas clouds and nebula formations, using the natural interference to mask their presence. The most clever ships had simply been running so quietly that even the advanced Zephyrian sensor arrays had missed them completely. They floated through space like ghosts, their engines barely producing enough energy to maintain position while they waited for the perfect moment to strike. When Soo-jin gave the attack order, her ships hit the Zephyrian fleet from 12 different directions simultaneously. The enemy had been expecting human attacks to come from predictable locations like Earth or the major colonies. Instead, they found themselves surrounded by vessels that had appeared from seemingly impossible positions. The humans did not try to match Zephyrian firepower directly. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, electronic warfare, and psychological pressure to make their enemies feel like they were fighting an invisible enemy that could be anywhere at any time. War Commander Thexvar watched his carefully organized fleet fall apart as human ships struck without warning and then disappeared again before his forces could respond effectively. His tactical computer systems, designed to predict enemy movements based on logical military principles, were completely useless against opponents who seemed to make decisions based on pure creativity rather than standard doctrine. After losing another 20 ships in a single day, Thexvar finally admitted defeat to himself. He opened a communication channel to Terra Station and requested negotiations with the Human Diplomatic Corps. Ambassador Ji-won received his message during her afternoon tea break. She consulted her appointment calendar and found an opening between her weekly budget review and a meeting with the station quartermaster about expanding the diplomatic coffee selection. "I can give you 30 minutes next Tuesday," she replied to the war commander's request. "Will that be sufficient time to discuss your concerns?" The official announcement came through standard diplomatic channels on a quiet Thursday morning. The Zephyrian High Command released a brief statement to the Galactic Council explaining that their military forces were conducting a strategic reassessment of regional priorities, and would be withdrawing from the Terran sector effective immediately. The carefully worded message made no mention of defeats, casualties, or failed conquest attempts. According to the official version, the mighty Zephyrian Empire had simply decided that their resources would be better used elsewhere in the galaxy. It was the kind of diplomatic language that fooled no one but allowed everyone to save face. War Commander Thexvar stood on the bridge of his battered flagship for the last time, watching the remnants of his once proud fleet limp toward the edge of human space. Of the 300 ships that had arrived with such confidence just 4 months ago, only 150 were still capable of making the journey home. The others floated as debris in space or had been so badly damaged that they required extensive repairs at neutral stations. He had already submitted his request for reassignment to a remote frontier posting, somewhere far from the core systems where news of his failure would be less likely to follow him. His military career, which had included victories over 47 different star systems, was effectively over. He would spend the rest of his service years managing supply depots or training new recruits, never again trusted with major combat operations. The humans had not just defeated him, they had made his entire military philosophy seem outdated and useless. Everything he had learned about warfare in his 50 years of service had proven worthless against an enemy that treated galactic conquest like a minor bureaucratic inconvenience. On Terra Station, Ambassador Ji-won barely noticed the Zephyrian departure. She was busy completing her monthly incident reports, a stack of paperwork that covered everything from minor trade disputes to diplomatic protocol violations. The Zephyrian conflict rated exactly 3 paragraphs in her summary, filed between a complaint about delayed cargo deliveries and a request for additional translator software. Zephyrian military forces withdrew from Terran space after brief defensive actions, she wrote in her neat handwriting. No significant damage to human installations or personnel. Defensive systems performed within expected parameters. Recommend continued monitoring of outer sector patrol routes. She signed the report, placed it in her outgoing mail folder, and immediately returned to her regular schedule. Her appointment calendar showed meetings about agricultural exports, cultural exchange programs, and a review of the space station's coffee procurement policies. Trade Minister Hyun-woo arrived at her office shortly after lunch, carrying a briefcase full of economic reports and a small thermos of green tea from his personal collection. He was a cheerful man in his 60s who had been managing interstellar commerce for over 20 years, and he always brought his own tea because he claimed the station's food services could never get the temperature quite right. The quarterly numbers look very encouraging, he said, settling into the comfortable chair across from Ji-won's desk. He poured 2 cups of tea and spread several charts across the workspace. Agricultural exports are up 18% from last quarter, and we're seeing increased demand from several new markets. Ji-won examined the charts with genuine interest, making small notes on her tablet as Hyun-woo explained the various trends and patterns. The end of the Zephyrian conflict had actually helped their trade relationships, as several species had been impressed by humanity's calm handling of the crisis. The Andromedans are particularly interested in importing more rice varieties, Hyun-woo mentioned, pointing to a specific section of his report. They want to expand beyond the basic white rice we've been selling them. Apparently, their chefs have discovered brown rice and wild rice, and they're very excited about the possibilities. Excellent, Ji-won replied, making a note on her calendar to follow up with the Agricultural Planning Committee. And how are the new shipping routes performing? The ones through the Vegas sector that we discussed last month. Better than expected, Hyun-woo said, pulling out another chart. Transit times have been reduced by 12%, and shipping costs are down significantly. Several other species have asked about using the same routes for their own cargo. They spent the next hour discussing expansion plans, quality control measures, and potential new markets for human goods. It was exactly the same kind of meeting they had been having for years, covering the same practical concerns that kept interstellar commerce running smoothly. Around the galaxy, news of the Zephyrian withdrawal spread quickly through both official diplomatic channels and informal gossip networks. The reaction was a mixture of amazement, relief, and growing realization about what had actually happened. The Aquatic Federation's intelligence analysts spent weeks trying to understand how the humans had defeated such a superior force. Their reports concluded that humanity had not won through better technology or larger numbers, but through decades of careful preparation and an almost supernatural ability to remain calm under pressure. The crystalline hegemony's philosophers wrote lengthy essays about the human approach to warfare, noting that they seemed to treat military conflicts as engineering problems rather than tests of honor or strength. Where other species fought with passion and emotion, humans fought with the same methodical efficiency they used for building roads or managing supply chains. The insectoid Thrak collective was perhaps the most impressed of all. Their species valued practical thinking and long-term planning above all other virtues, and they recognized that the humans had been preparing for exactly this type of threat for generations. Every aspect of human space infrastructure, from mining operations to cargo shipping, had been designed with potential military applications in mind. Most importantly, the humans had never acted like they were doing anything special or heroic. They had treated the greatest military threat in recent galactic history as just another problem to be solved with careful planning, practical engineering, and steady nerves. Ambassador Ji-won ended her workday by approving a proposal for expanded embassy facilities and reviewing applications for new diplomatic positions. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and probably another species that thought humanity could be easily intimidated. She made a mental note to ask the quartermaster about ordering more coffee. It was going to be another busy week.